My name is Rachel Monroe. I am 35 years old, a financial analyst living in Cleveland, Ohio. Just 6 months ago, I signed the papers that ended a 10-year marriage, and I thought the worst heartbreak of my life was behind me. I was wrong. The deepest cut didn't come from my ex-husband at all. It came from the people I trusted most, my own family. Sit back, relax, and stay with me until the very end of this story. I know it sounds unthinkable, but after everything I had done for them, my family betrayed me in a way I never saw coming. I had poured myself into their lives, giving them money, security, comfort. I thought I was keeping us together. But what I discovered one gray Cleveland afternoon shattered me more than my divorce ever had. Before I tell you what happened, take a moment. If you have ever been blindsided by someone you love, leave a comment below. Share your story. And if you want to hear more stories like mine, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. I had been clinging to the idea that family would be my anchor. After the messy end of my marriage, I believed they would keep me grounded. That belief was what led me to do something extravagant, something wildly out of character for a woman who counts every cent for a living. I charged more than $22,000 to my credit card and booked a dream vacation for all of us. Maui, Hawaii, flights, a beachfront resort, even snorkeling tours. I wanted everything perfect. I wanted the sand and the sunsets to heal us, to remind us we were still a family. I remember holding the confirmation emails on my phone like they were a promise. In my head, I pictured my mom and dad laughing at dinner by the ocean, my sister Emily and I walking along the shoreline. I thought maybe if I gave them this gift, it would be a way for all of us to wash away the bitterness that had grown since my divorce. The day I called my mom to ask how the planning was going, my hands actually trembled. The phone rang twice before she answered. I tried to sound cheerful. I asked her what she thought about the trip, how excited she was. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then in a voice so flat it cut me, she said, "Oh, we already went last week. Just family. Just family." The words rang in my ears. My heart stopped. I had paid for the whole thing, and yet I hadn't even been invited. I stood frozen in my small apartment, blinds half open to the pale winter light off Lake Erie, realizing the truth. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a sister anymore. I was just their bank account. That single moment, that single sentence, burned itself into my memory. And it was only the beginning of what became the ugliest unraveling of family ties I have ever known. And that was when I started to look back at the years of sacrifice I had made for them. I sat alone in my apartment after that phone call, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I could not escape. The words my mother had said replayed in my head over and over until they became almost unbearable. Just family. As if I did not belong, as if the years I had spent holding them above water meant nothing. I told myself to breathe, to calm down, but my hands would not stop shaking. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I had to face what I had been avoiding for months. I pulled out my laptop, opened my banking records, and forced myself to look at the numbers. The figures glared back at me, sharp and unforgiving. Line after line of payments scrolled across the screen, each one a reminder of how much of myself I had poured into them. Over the past 2 years, I had sent my parents and Emily $72,000. I whispered the number out loud just to hear how heavy it sounded. $72,000. That was more than some people made in a year, and I had given it away without hesitation, believing it would somehow buy me love or closeness. The Hawaii trip was the largest single expense, $22,000 in one reckless wave of generosity. But the truth was in the smaller numbers too, the ones that piled up month after month until they formed a mountain. $200 here for rent, $800 there for a car repair, $500 for some vague emergency. Emily refused to explain. There were transfers for groceries, utilities, even a down payment for the used Honda Civic she now drove, as if it had appeared out of thin air. Every time they asked, I gave. I told myself it was my duty, that keeping them stable would keep us together. The more I scrolled, the more my chest tightened. Each payment was like a brick laid between me and the life I wanted for myself. I remembered weekends when I had planned to escape to Chicago for a short trip, only to cancel because my father said they could not make rent. I remembered looking at couches online, dreaming of making my apartment feel less empty, then transferring that money to cover Emily's car insurance instead. I even postponed therapy sessions after my divorce because I could not justify the cost when my parents' electric bill was due. What cut deepest was how normal it had all begun to feel. I had become the automatic solution to every problem, the first call they made when something went wrong. My generosity had turned into their entitlement, and I had been too blind to see it. Sitting there in the dim light of my apartment, I realized how far I had drifted from myself. I had been so busy patching up their lives that I had let mine slowly unravel. The betrayal of the Hawaii trip was not just about being excluded. It was the sudden, undeniable proof that my sacrifices meant nothing to them. I could picture them laughing under the Maui sun while I sat alone in Cleveland's gray slush. They had taken my money, taken my effort, taken my hope, and left me behind without even the courtesy of a phone call. That thought made my stomach twist with a mix of anger and shame. How had I let it go this far? The shame was almost worse than the anger. Shame that I had ignored the warning signs. Shame that I had believed love could be bought with checks and transfers. Shame that I had allowed myself to be used. My ex-husband's lawyer had once told me during our divorce settlement that I was too generous for my own good. At the time, I laughed it off. Now I wondered if he had seen something in me I refused to admit. I closed my laptop and pressed my palms to my eyes, but the numbers were burned into my vision. $72,000. Years of hard work, late nights at the office, extra hours taken on to pad my savings, all funneled into a bottomless pit. I had given them everything, thinking it would tether us together after the storm of my divorce. Instead, it had left me adrift, more alone than ever. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face, calm and dismissive, as if excluding me from the trip had been nothing at all. I heard Emily's voice, always quick to ask for help, but never once asking how I was. I saw my father's silence, his refusal to check in on me, even when I was falling apart. The realization gnawed at me until I could no longer stay still. I got out of bed and paced the apartment, whispering questions to myself. Why had I thought they would change? Why had I convinced myself that giving more would make them love me more? Why did I think I had to prove my worth by paying their way? I wanted answers, but there were none. Only a gnawing emptiness in my chest and the sick understanding that I had been blind. By morning, I felt hollow, but in that hollow space, something new was stirring, a hard edge of resolve. I could not keep going like this. I could not continue being their safety net while they trampled over me without a thought. I had spent 2 years losing myself in their needs, but now the betrayal was too sharp to ignore. As I sat with my untouched coffee, watching the snow swirl outside my window, I knew that something had to change. I was not sure yet how, but I felt the first spark of determination. I would not let them drain me anymore, and when Emily called a few weeks later with her usual request for money, I was finally ready to answer differently. The phone rang one late afternoon while I was buried in spreadsheets at my kitchen table. When I saw Emily's name flash across the screen, a familiar heaviness sank into my stomach. I already knew what the call was about. She rarely reached out unless she wanted something. Still, part of me hoped foolishly that maybe this time it would be different. I answered, forcing my voice to stay neutral. "Hey, Em." She didn't bother with small talk. "Rachel, the landlord's on me again. Rent's overdue." "About 2,000. Can you send it today?" Her tone was light, almost casual, as if she were asking me to grab her milk from the store. She spoke with the same certainty a person has when asking for something they know will always be given. But this time I felt a rush of heat in my chest. I thought of the $72,000 I had drained into their lives, of the vacation they had taken without me, of my mother's voice calling it just family. I tightened my grip on the phone. "Only for family, remember?" I said. My voice came out sharper than I intended. Each word clipped like a blade. There was silence on the line. Then she laughed, a quick forced chuckle that didn't reach her eyes, even though I couldn't see her. "What's that supposed to mean? We are family. Don't make this weird, Rach." Her words, coated with a mix of annoyance and coaxing, made me realize how long she had counted on my weakness. How she had leaned on my guilt, on my need for acceptance, to keep her life comfortable while mine stayed on hold. but the spell had broken. "I'm not sending it," I said firmly. My voice surprised even me. It was steady, unshaking, a sound I hadn't heard in years. Emily gasped lightly, as though she hadn't even considered the possibility of me refusing. "You can't just leave us hanging. What do you expect me to do?" For a moment, guilt threatened to push its way back into my chest, the old reflex to rescue them. But I swallowed it down. "Figure it out," I said quietly. And before she could say anything else, I ended the call. My hands trembled as I set the phone down, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was adrenaline, the surge of finally drawing a boundary. For the first time in years, I had said no. I didn't give myself time to second guess. I grabbed my laptop and opened the banking app I had avoided for too long. My fingers moved with purpose as I pulled up the recurring payment section. There they were, lined up like shackles I had willingly locked around myself. $200 each month to their landlord, $300 for Emily's car insurance, $200 for the family phone plan. Smaller amounts for internet, utilities, even subscriptions Emily had insisted were essential. I hovered for a second, but only a second. Then I clicked cancel on the rent transfer. A confirmation box appeared. "Are you sure?" "Yes." The weight lifted slightly from my shoulders. Then I hit cancel on the car insurance, the phone bill, the internet. One by one, I watched the confirmations pop up, each one like breaking a chain I had carried too long. My chest tightened, but not from fear this time. It was from release, from the sudden realization that I was not powerless. I had been funding their lives at the expense of my own, and with a few clicks, I had stopped it. Still, I knew they would not take this quietly. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, feeling the flicker of empowerment, but also the edge of dread. They would come after me. Emily would not stop at a phone call. My parents would not simply shrug and accept the change. And if history was any guide, they would use every tool at their disposal to pull me back in. That night, I called my financial advisor, Caroline Mitchell, and asked her for an urgent appointment. Her voice was brisk but calm, the kind of tone that gave me confidence. "We'll secure your accounts," she said without hesitation. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Bring identification. We'll make sure nothing can move without your approval. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, the glow from the security camera app blinking faintly on my phone. For the first time in years, I felt like I had taken even a small piece of my life back. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew this was only the beginning. Families who grow used to taking do not let go easily. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, I wondered how they would react when the money no longer came. I imagined the phone calls, the accusations, the guilt trips sharpened into weapons. I tried to prepare myself for the storm I felt gathering, because deep down, I knew Emily's call was not the end of it. It was only the opening shot. And I was about to find out just how far my family was willing to go once they realized I was no longer their safety net. The morning started quietly, almost deceptively so. I had brewed a fresh pot of coffee and was settling into the familiar routine of preparing my work files when I heard the unmistakable sound of car doors slamming outside my apartment building. It was sharp, insistent, a sound that instantly pulled me out of my calm. I froze, the mug halfway to my lips, and a chill spread down my spine. Something inside me whispered that this was not just a neighbor or a delivery. I set the mug down on the counter and slowly walked to the window, parting the blinds with my fingertips. My breath caught when I saw them. Standing by the curb were my parents, Charles and Margaret, both dressed too formally for a casual visit. My father shifted uncomfortably, hands stuffed deep into his coat pockets. My mother's face was pinched tight, her arms crossed with the same expression she wore when she was ready to scold me as a child. Emily stood between them, her posture confident, her chin lifted like she had come here to win something. And next to them was a man I had never seen before, tall, lean, in a dark suit with a polished briefcase in hand. My heart began to pound. They had brought a lawyer. Before I could process, the doorbell rang. The buzz was sharp, demanding, vibrating through the small apartment as though it meant to break through the walls. I stood there, staring at the door, my mind screaming at me not to open it. But another part of me, the part that had grown weary of running from their expectations, urged me forward. I gripped the handle, inhaled deeply, and pulled it open. They were all there, lined up like a wall. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father's eyes avoided mine. Emily stepped forward, her expression dripping with false concern. "Rachel, we need to talk," she said, her tone syrupy and rehearsed. The man in the suit extended his hand, though his eyes were cold and calculating. "Victor Hayes, I represent your family's interests. They are concerned about your recent decisions. We'd like to discuss your obligations." His voice was crisp, clipped, the kind of tone designed to intimidate. Obligations. The word landed like a slap across my face. I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting the urge to let them see the way my stomach twisted. They were not here to ask. They were here to demand. Emily jumped in before I could respond. "You can't just stop helping us. We're family. You owe us. Dad and Mom need you. I need you. Do you want us to end up on the street?" Her voice rose with every word, louder and sharper, designed to pierce through any resistance I might have. My mother nodded, lips pursed. "Rachel, you've always taken care of us. That's what family does. You can't just turn your back now." Finally, my father muttered in his gruff tone, still avoiding my eyes. "We need that money to get by. Be reasonable, Rachel." Their words layered over one another, a suffocating chorus of guilt and expectation pressing against me like heavy chains. They had always known how to manipulate me, how to corner me with words like family, duty, and obligation until I felt I had no choice but to give in. But something in me had shifted. I had spent too many nights staring at empty bank balances, too many mornings drowning in shame. The Hawaii betrayal had seared away my blindness. I straightened, my voice steadier than I felt. "I don't owe you anything." The silence that followed was heavy, almost stunned. My mother's eyes widened as if I had blasphemed. Emily's face twisted into disbelief. "You're being selfish," she snapped, her voice sharp as broken glass. Mr. Hayes raised a hand, his tone measured but laced with threat. "Miss Monroe, your family depends on your support. If you refuse, we can resolve this legally. It would be best for you to reconsider before it reaches that point." For a moment, fear clawed at me. Legal action. Court. The humiliation of being dragged into something public, messy, and costly. But then I remembered every canceled trip, every unpaid therapy session, every moment I had sacrificed for them while they laughed in Maui without me. My fear hardened into resolve. "Then take it to court," I said, stepping back into the doorway. My voice cut through the air with finality. "You're not welcome here." And with that, I shut the door in their faces. The slam echoed through the apartment like a gunshot, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Through the door, I could hear their voices rising in a storm of outrage, muffled but insistent. Emily's high-pitched protests, my mother's sharp reprimands, my father's gruff mutters, and Hayes trying to corral them into order. I pressed my back against the door, my chest heaving, and closed my eyes. I had drawn the line, once and for all. But I knew this wasn't over. People who are used to taking rarely walk away quietly. My family would not accept my refusal as final. They would escalate, push harder, find new ways to corner me. I slid down to the floor, my knees pulled up, the faint hum of the security camera above my door reminding me I was at least protected for now. Still, a knot of dread twisted in my stomach. If they had already brought a lawyer to my doorstep, what would they bring next? That thought lingered in my mind as the pounding on the door faded and the car doors slammed again outside. I didn't know what their next move would be, but I knew one thing for certain. The battle for my independence had only just begun, and I had to be ready for whatever storm was coming. The week after they showed up at my door, I lived with the uneasy quiet of someone waiting for the next blow. Every sound outside my apartment set me on edge. The buzz of the intercom, the slam of car doors, even footsteps in the hallway made my pulse spike. I knew my family well enough to understand that silence from them didn't mean surrender. It meant planning. It was a Thursday morning when the knock finally came. Not the harsh pounding I had braced myself for, but a polite, measured tapping, 3 short knocks. My security camera pinged on my phone, and I pulled up the feed. A woman in a gray wool coat stood there, clipboard tucked under her arm, her posture professional. No Emily, no parents, no lawyer. I opened the door a cautious inch. "Yes?" She smiled politely, though her eyes were assessing sharp. "Miss Monroe? I'm Dana Coleman, a social worker with the county. I'd like to come in for a moment. It'll only take a few minutes. My stomach dropped. A social worker. My mind immediately supplied the answer, Emily. This was her next move. I stepped aside reluctantly, letting her in, my heart hammering against my ribs. She sat on the edge of my couch, crossing her legs neatly, pulling a pen from her coat pocket. We received a report concerning your recent behavior. The report states that you've been acting erratically, making impulsive financial decisions that have negatively impacted your family's stability. There it was, plain and cruel. The words felt rehearsed, like a script Emily had fed her. I sat across from her, my hands gripping my knees, trying to steady myself. I'm fine, I said, though my voice trembled slightly. This isn't about me being unstable. This is about my family trying to control me because I stopped paying their bills. Dana gave me a measured look and began jotting something in her notes. I understand, but my role is to assess, not judge. I'll need to ask you a few questions, and I'll need to review any documents you have that can confirm your financial situation and employment stability. For a brief moment, panic fluttered in my chest. Then I remembered the folder I had prepared after my meeting with Caroline, my financial advisor. Proof of everything: pay stubs, tax returns, bank statements, letters from my employer, evidence of my stability, my competence, my hard work. Give me 1 second, I said, hurrying to my desk. I pulled the folder out, my fingers trembling as I carried it back and set it in her lap. She flipped through the pages slowly, pausing to study each one. These are thorough, she admitted after a few minutes. Your employment history looks solid. 10 years with the same firm, regular promotions. Your financial records are consistent. I don't see signs of reckless behavior here. I felt a tiny breath of relief, but kept my guard up. Because there aren't any, I said firmly. My sister is angry because I stopped funding her life. That's all this is. Dana nodded slightly, though her pen didn't stop moving. I'll need to verify this with your employer and your bank, but what I'm seeing here doesn't align with the claims in the report. Still, I could feel the humiliation rising in me, hot and bitter. My sister had dragged me into this. She had painted me as unstable, as incapable of managing my own life, just so she could claw her way back into my bank account. That betrayal burned worse than anything she had ever done before. As Dana continued her notes, I excused myself for a moment and stepped into the kitchen. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and dialed Daniel Lawson's number. When he answered, his calm voice was exactly what I needed. Mr. Lawson, I have a social worker in my apartment, I whispered, forcing my voice steady. She says Emily filed a report claiming I'm unstable. Put me on speaker, he instructed without hesitation. I walked back into the living room and placed the phone on the coffee table. Miss Coleman, this is my attorney, Daniel Lawson. Miss Coleman, Lawson's voice came through strong and measured. Please know that my client has retained legal counsel due to ongoing harassment from her family. This report is clearly part of that pattern. You'll find her documents confirm her stability and competence. I'd ask that your review reflect that. Dana's pen paused. She looked up at me, then at the phone. I'll note everything appropriately, she said carefully. My focus is only on the present facts. After another 20 minutes, she closed her folder, thanked me for my cooperation, and promised to follow up once she verified the records. I walked her to the door, my body buzzing with adrenaline. The moment it clicked, shut behind her, I sagged against the frame. My chest felt tight, my hands clammy. I had gotten through it, but the fear lingered like smoke after a fire. Emily wasn't just asking for money anymore. She was trying to strip me of my credibility, to make me look unfit in the eyes of strangers, maybe even in the eyes of the law. As I stood in the quiet of my apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Stay calm. You did the right thing. We'll get ahead of this. I wanted to believe him, but dread still pressed on me. If Emily had gone as far as involving a social worker, what would she do next? How far would my family be willing to go to keep control of me? That thought stayed with me long after the apartment grew dark, and I realized I was only at the beginning of a battle that was about to get much uglier. By the time the weekend arrived, my nerves were raw. I had barely slept since the social worker's visit, every creak of the building making me jump. My apartment felt more like a cage than a refuge, every corner heavy with tension. I needed air. I needed faces that didn't look at me as a bank account. I needed people who actually saw me. That was what pushed me to drag myself to the library for our monthly book club meeting, even though part of me wanted to stay curled up in bed and hide. The library's meeting room was warm and familiar, lined with tall windows that overlooked the quiet street outside. As soon as I stepped inside, the hum of conversation washed over me, softer and kinder than anything I'd felt in weeks. Martha and Louise were laughing about something in the corner. Evelyn was arranging cookies on a paper plate. And Janet, my closest friend in the group, was flipping through the novel we'd been assigned. But the moment Janet's eyes met mine, her smile faltered. She crossed the room quickly and placed a hand on my arm. "Rachel, you look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders. What's going on?" Her words cracked open the dam I'd been holding shut. I pulled her aside, and in a voice that shook more than I wanted it to, I spilled everything. The confrontation at my door, the lawyer, the social worker sitting in my living room with her clipboard, accusing me of being unstable. The way my family had twisted the truth into weapons. My throat tightened as I spoke, but Janet didn't interrupt. She didn't look away. She listened, really listened, in a way my own family never had. When I finally fell silent, she squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing by cutting them off. You don't deserve this. They don't get to treat you like this." The firmness in her voice startled me. She wasn't just comforting me, she was reminding me of my strength, the strength I kept doubting. My chest loosened just enough to take a full breath. "I feel like I'm going crazy," I admitted. "Like maybe they're right, maybe I'm the selfish one." "Stop." Her tone was sharp, slicing through my spiral. "You're not crazy. I know exactly what they're doing because I've lived it. My brother used to bleed me dry the same way. Rent, car repairs, groceries, all of it. I thought it was my job to keep him afloat, until I realized he was spending my money on vacations and new gadgets while I skipped meals to cover his bills." She shook her head, her eyes hardening. "I cut him off, Rachel. He tried to guilt me, to make me feel like the worst sister in the world. But I hired a lawyer, drew a hard line, and never looked back. It was the hardest thing I ever did, but also the best." Her story hit me like a jolt. It was uncanny how close it felt to mine. The details were different, but the pattern was the same. The manipulation, the guilt, the entitlement. I wasn't alone in this after all. "So what did you do when he wouldn't stop?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I got backup," she said simply. She reached into her bag and pulled out a napkin, scribbling a name in quick, looping letters. "Daniel Lawson. He was my lawyer. He doesn't mess around. He knows exactly how to deal with people who try to weaponize family ties. Call him, today." I stared at the name, my pulse quickening. The weight of it, the idea of having someone officially on my side, steadied me in a way I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Before I could thank her, Martha and Louise drifted over, curious about our hushed tones. I hesitated, embarrassed to share, but Janet nudged me gently. "Tell them," she whispered. So I did. I told them everything, my voice shaking less this time as I spoke. Their reactions were immediate and fierce. "They're trying to break you down," Martha said, her voice firm with indignation. "But you're stronger than they think." "You've got your head on straight, Rachel," Louise added. "Don't let them make you doubt yourself." Even Evelyn, usually quiet and reserved, spoke up with quiet conviction. "Whatever you need, we're here. You don't have to face this alone." Their words wrapped around me like a shield. I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear them until that moment. For so long, I had been standing on shaky ground, feeling isolated, like I was the only one who saw what was happening. But here, with my friends, I felt steadier, as if I had an army at my back. By the time the meeting ended, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. I tucked the napkin with Daniel Lawson's name into my pocket, as though it were a lifeline. Walking out into the cold Cleveland air, I realized I wasn't trembling anymore. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I didn't feel completely alone. That night, back in my apartment, I sat at my desk and stared at the name written in blue ink, Daniel Lawson. The idea of calling a lawyer made my stomach twist, but I knew Janet was right. If my family had already brought legal threats to my doorstep, I couldn't face this battle without someone in my corner. I picked up my phone, my hand steady this time, and began to dial. I didn't know what lay ahead, But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The next chapter of this fight would not be mine to fight alone. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, a mix that clung to the air like history itself. As I walked through the heavy doors of the Cuyahoga County Courthouse that morning, my knees felt unsteady, though I forced my chin up. Daniel Lawson walked beside me, calm and composed, his leather briefcase swinging at his side as if we were here for just another business meeting. To him, maybe it was routine. To me, it was everything. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones. I slid into the seat beside Daniel at the defendant's table and clasped my hands together to hide the way they trembled. Across the aisle, I saw them. My family. My parents sitting stiffly in the front row, Emily right beside them with her chin high, her expression an almost smug mask. And next to them, their lawyer, Victor Hayes, neat and composed, flipping through his stack of papers with clinical precision. I forced myself to breathe in and out, though my chest felt like it was bound in iron. Judge William Carter entered, his robes flowing, his eyes sharp and watchful. Everyone stood, then sat again. The scrape of chairs echoed in the silence. Hayes began with a voice smooth enough to slide across glass. He painted a picture of me as unstable, erratic, a woman unmoored after divorce. He said that by cutting off my family financially, I had left them in hardship and demonstrated impulsive decision-making that proved I was unfit to manage my own finances. His words were polished lies, carefully wrapped in just enough truth to sting. Then Emily took the stand. She clasped a tissue in her hand, twisting it for effect, her voice trembling as though rehearsed. "My sister has always been generous," she said, looking at the judge with wide eyes. "But lately she's been unpredictable. She shut us out without reason. We're worried about her. She isn't herself." I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout that I had every reason in the world, that she had taken my money, my trust, and my love, and left me empty. But I stayed quiet, nails digging into my palms, because Daniel had told me silence could be just as powerful as words. Then my father testified, his voice low and gruff. "She's changed. She used to be steady. Now she makes rash decisions. We just want to protect her, to make sure she's safe." Safe. The word burned in my chest. They weren't here to protect me. They were here to control me. Hayes called 2 witnesses next. One was a former co-worker of my father's, who claimed he'd heard I was reckless with money. The other was a neighbor of Emily's, who said she'd noticed me withdrawing from family gatherings. Each statement was thin, hearsay strung together like tissue paper. Daniel rose each time with a sharp objection, his voice cutting clean through the courtroom. Judge Carter sustained him again and again, striking the flimsy testimony from the record. For the first time that day, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. Then Daniel called our first witness. Dr. Barbara Klein, the psychiatrist who had met with me after the social worker's visit, walked to the stand. Her voice was steady, her presence calm but firm. "Miss Monroe is fully competent," she said. "She manages a demanding job, makes rational financial decisions, and demonstrates resilience under stress. My assessment found no signs of erratic behavior. Her decision to stop funding her family was not impulsive. It was an act of self-preservation." Hayes tried to rattle her, pressing about my divorce, about the stress I had faced. Dr. Klein didn't flinch. "Stress does not equate to incapacity," she said clearly. "Miss Monroe's choices are deliberate and appropriate." Then it was my turn. My legs felt heavy as I walked to the witness stand, the eyes of my family searing into me with every step. I swore to tell the truth, sat down, and folded my hands tightly in my lap. "Miss Monroe," Daniel began gently, "can you explain to the court why you chose to stop supporting your family financially?" I lifted my head, forcing my voice to steady even though my throat was tight. "I supported them for years," I said, meeting Judge Carter's eyes. "I paid their rent, their bills, their car repairs. I even funded a family vacation to Hawaii that I wasn't invited to. I thought if I gave enough, they would love me, they would include me. But when I realized I was being used, I stopped. That's not erratic. That's survival." I pulled out the folder of evidence I had prepared. Performance reviews from my job showing consistent promotions, bank statements reflecting stable savings, emails from my employer confirming my reliability. Each piece of paper was a stone in the wall of proof I was building to protect myself. Hayes rose, his questions sharp, his tone needling. Miss Monroe, isn't it true you acted out of spite, cutting them off without warning? No, I said, my voice firm. I acted out of necessity. They demanded money while excluding me from their lives. I will not be reduced to a wallet. The silence that followed my words was heavy, charged. I could feel my family's glares drilling into me, but I kept my eyes forward, my back straight. Daniel closed with a statement as clear as steel. Your Honor, the plaintiffs have no evidence of incapacity, only vague claims and emotional manipulation. Miss Monroe's records and Dr. Klein's testimony prove her competence. This lawsuit is nothing more than an attempt to control her through the courts. When Judge Carter recessed, I sat there barely breathing, my pulse hammering so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. Daniel leaned close and whispered, "You did well. We've got this." His confidence steadied me when my own was faltering. When the judge returned, the air in the room felt electric, as if the very walls were holding their breath. He lifted his pen, looked down at his notes, and then spoke with deliberate clarity. The plaintiffs have failed to provide credible evidence of Miss Monroe's incapacity. Her financial decisions, supported by documentation and expert testimony, are rational. This case is dismissed. The words washed over me like a tidal wave. Relief surged so fast it almost knocked me back. My shoulders sagged, and I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Across the room, I saw Emily's face crumble, my mother's lips pressed tighter, my father's head drop. Hayes gathered his papers quickly, avoiding my gaze. I had won. Not just the case, but the right to my own life. Yet even as I left the courthouse, the weight lifting with every step, I knew this was not the end. People who feel entitled rarely stop fighting after the first loss. My family had pushed me into a courtroom once. I couldn't shake the fear of what they might do next. When the gavel came down and Judge Carter's voice declared the case dismissed, it felt as though the air itself had shifted around me. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than I had in years, but the relief was tangled with exhaustion. I had just defended my right to live my life on my own terms, and for the first time in so long, no one could take that away from me. Yet, beneath that freedom was a current of unease. My family had tried to strip me of my independence with lies and manipulation. They had dragged me into a courtroom, forced me to bear my life for a judge's scrutiny, and still, it hadn't been enough for them. People like that rarely stopped after one defeat. In the days that followed, I waited for another knock at the door, another letter, another ambush. But instead, there was silence. At first, it felt eerie, almost like the calm after a storm when you know the clouds are still lurking nearby. Then, slowly, I began to notice something I hadn't felt in years: peace. For the first time in a long while, my phone wasn't buzzing with demands. My email wasn't full of pleas disguised as emergencies. I could go to work, return home, and sit in my apartment without the constant weight of expectation pressing on my shoulders. Still, I couldn't help but wonder what was happening on their side. I heard pieces of gossip through mutual acquaintances. Emily had picked up a second job, waiting tables at a late-night diner while still working her cashier shift at the grocery store. My parents had moved out of the house I once helped them keep and into a cramped apartment on the edge of Cleveland, a far cry from the comfort they had known when my money kept their lives afloat. Part of me wanted to feel pity. These were, after all, my family. I had grown up under that same roof, eating dinners at the same table. But when I thought of the Hawaii trip, the courtroom lies, the humiliation of the social worker's visit, pity faded. They hadn't just taken from me. They had tried to erase me. What I felt instead was a strange kind of liberation. I wasn't responsible for their choices anymore. Their bills, their debts, their discomforts were no longer mine to shoulder. I had spent years bending myself into exhaustion trying to keep them standing, only to realize they had no intention of ever standing on their own. Now, finally, they had no choice. One evening, a week after the ruling, I stood at my window watching the lights shimmer over Lake Erie. The city looked different to me, brighter somehow, though nothing outside had changed. The difference was inside me. For years, my identity had been tied to what I could give, to how much I could sacrifice. Every check I wrote, every transfer I made was a silent plea for acceptance, for love. And every time they took without gratitude, without acknowledgement, I had convinced myself to give more, thinking maybe this time it would be enough. It never was. Now I understood something I should have learned long ago. My worth wasn't measured in the dollars I handed over. My value wasn't a ledger for them to balance. It was in my resilience, in my ability to reclaim what they had tried to take. The first night I slept without fear of another knock, I dreamed of freedom. I woke before dawn, the apartment quiet, my chest no longer tight. I walked to the kitchen, brewed coffee, and realized I didn't feel dread rising with the steam from the cup. Instead, I felt possibility. I began to take small steps into this new life. I cooked my own dinners, simple meals at first, and then more elaborate ones, testing recipes I had clipped years earlier, but never tried, because money always seemed too tight. I walked through shops downtown without guilt pressing me down, allowing myself to buy a book I wanted or a sweater that caught my eye. It wasn't about the items. It was about choosing myself, finally, without the voice of obligation whispering in my ear. And yet, as empowering as it was, I couldn't ignore the shadow that lingered. My family had lost, but I knew them too well to believe it was the end. Their silence wasn't surrender. It was the pause of strategizing. They would not forgive me for taking away their lifeline, for proving in front of a judge that they had no hold on me. The thought haunted me, even as I felt stronger each day. One night, as I locked up my apartment before bed, I stood in the doorway, new deadbolt secure, camera light blinking faintly, and told myself something I hadn't dared to before. If they came again, if they tried to pull me back into their chaos, I would not break. I had drawn the line, I had stood my ground, and I was not afraid of fighting again. But I also knew the fight was not over. It was only a matter of time before the next move arrived. 3 months after the trial ended, I packed the last box in my old apartment and looked around the space that had been both my shelter and my prison. The walls carried the weight of too many sleepless nights, too many phone calls where I gave away money I didn't really have to spare, too many memories of standing at the window, wondering why love always seemed to come with a price tag. It wasn't just an apartment anymore. It was a graveyard of who I used to be, the woman who believed her worth was measured in what she could sacrifice. I closed the door behind me for the last time, the key heavy in my palm before I slid it into the landlord's drop box. My new apartment overlooked Lake Erie, a view that stretched wide and bright. The first time I stepped inside, I felt something shift. The walls were clean, the rooms uncluttered, and the air smelled faintly of fresh paint, not regret. I spent that first week unpacking slowly, arranging my books on the shelves, placing plants near the wide windows, letting sunlight spill into corners that had once held shadows. Every item I placed felt intentional. This was mine, not theirs, not bought for someone else's comfort. It was the first space in years that felt like it belonged entirely to me. The silence in the evenings was different here. It wasn't heavy with dread or expectation. It was peaceful. I would stand at the window with a glass of wine, looking at the city lights glittering across the water, and feel a kind of calm I had almost forgotten existed. It was strange at first, not bracing myself for a phone call, demanding money, or an unexpected knock at the door. My phone sat on the counter, quiet. For once, silence was not a threat. It was freedom. I began doing small things I had once denied myself. I signed up for a cooking class at the community center. The first night, flour dusted my hands as I tried to roll out pasta dough, the shape uneven and awkward. I laughed out loud, really laughed, when the instructor leaned over and said, "You're getting the hang of it." That laugh startled me, not because it was loud, but because it felt real. I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed without bitterness clinging to the edges. Cooking became a ritual, a way of reclaiming the joy of creating something just for me. I mastered a simple marinara sauce, then pushed myself toward risotto, stirring patiently as the grains absorbed broth one ladle at a time. Each dish felt like proof that I could build something for myself, piece by piece, without anyone taking it away. I also started planning something I had never dared before, a trip for myself. I spread brochures across the dining table, circling destinations with a pen. Italy called to me with its promise of rolling hills, cobblestone streets, and cooking schools tucked into the heart of Tuscany. Maine tempted me too, with its rugged coastlines and the idea of standing on the cliffs of Acadia National Park, the sea crashing below me. For the first time, The money I once sent to cover someone else's rent now became the savings I could use to see the world. At night, I kept a journal by my bed. The words came slowly at first, but soon they poured out. I wrote about the woman I had been, about the years of tying my worth to the weight of my family's demands. I wrote about the moment in the courtroom when I realized I wasn't just fighting for money. I was fighting for my right to live. And I wrote about the future, about what it meant to dream again, to plan for something that wasn't tied to anyone else's survival. Through a mutual acquaintance, I heard about my parents and Emily. They had settled into that cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. Emily was juggling 2 jobs, her exhaustion plain to anyone who saw her. My parents no longer had the safety net I had always provided. A part of me felt a pang of sadness, a whisper of the old reflex to fix it. But that reflex no longer controlled me. I had spent too many years believing pity was the same as love. Now I knew better. Their struggles were the consequences of their own choices. Mine were no longer tied to them. The most powerful moment came one evening when I invited my book club friends over to see the new place. Janet arrived with her knowing smile, Louise with a bottle of wine, and Martha with a tray of cookies. Evelyn, quiet as ever, gave me a hug that lingered longer than usual. As they settled into my living room, their laughter filling the space, I realized how different this support felt. They weren't here because they wanted something from me. They were here simply to share my joy. Janet raised her glass, her eyes locking on mine. "To Rachel," she said firmly. "To new beginnings." The clink of glasses echoed through the apartment, and I felt the truth settle deep inside me. I wasn't just free from their demands. I was free to build a life that was mine, piece by piece, moment by moment. Yet as I stood at the window later that night, watching the city glow, a shadow of unease flickered at the edges of my peace. My family had vanished into silence before, only to return with sharper claws. I told myself I was stronger now, that I had friends and proof and my own resilience to protect me. Still, as the lake stretched endlessly before me, I couldn't ignore the nagging thought that my story with them wasn't finished. Not yet. When I look back now, it almost feels like I lived 2 different lives. The first was defined by fear, guilt, and the endless need to prove my love by giving more than I had. The second began the moment I chose to draw a line, the moment I said no and meant it. That decision was terrifying, but it was also the most powerful turning point of my life. I used to believe that family meant sacrifice, that being a daughter or a sister meant carrying the weight for everyone else. I thought if I gave enough, eventually they would see me, value me, maybe even love me the way I longed for. What I didn't understand was that love can't be bought. Real love doesn't come with an invoice. It doesn't drain you until there's nothing left. Winning that courtroom battle was more than just a legal victory. It was proof that I wasn't crazy for wanting boundaries. It was validation that I had the right to my own choices, my own money, and my own life. But even more than that, it was a moment of awakening. I realized my worth had never been tied to what I could provide. My worth was in the resilience I showed, in the courage it took to stand alone, and in the strength to reclaim my future. Now, when I sit in my new apartment, when I stir a pot of pasta sauce I made myself or flip through brochures for trips I want to take, I feel something I haven't in years. Freedom. Not just financial freedom, but emotional freedom. The freedom to wake up without dread, to make choices without guilt, to know that I can build a life that belongs entirely to me. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that boundaries are not selfish. They are necessary. Saying no doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself to stop allowing others to take pieces of you until nothing remains. For anyone watching this who has ever felt trapped by family expectations, I want you to hear me clearly. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. So here's my advice. Look closely at the patterns in your life. If you find yourself constantly giving while receiving nothing in return, ask yourself what it's costing you. Ask yourself if love should really feel like debt. And if the answer scares you, know that you're not alone. It is possible to step away. It is possible to build something new. I'm living proof. If this story resonated with you, I'd love for you to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. And please, leave a comment below. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you love? And what did it teach you about yourself?